So this morning I was learning music, and I've been learning music for the past little while because I got a MIDI keyboard, which I'm really quite enjoying. But the thing is that when I was learning music this morning, I noticed that I was scattered and my learning just was not effective. It was not good, it wasn't even great, never mind great, it was just scattered. And when I came away from that morning deep work block, I realized that what I needed was to create a framework for learning effectively. And I know that sounds strange. Why do you just walk away and think, I need to create a framework? I just love to create frameworks and kind of collect ideas together. And I've just labored over creating a framework for this over the past few hours for effective learning. And well, the thing is that I've been learning all of this over the past few years, yet it's only now in the past few hours that I've actually consolidated this and turned this into a cohesive framework. So I literally just created this for myself so I could improve my learning, but I'll just share with it you I'll share it with you now because hopefully it will help you too. And I'll start by saying that these are not hacks. These are not random things that I've just come up with and just or that I've made up. These are fundamental things. These are rooted. I'm just going to turn my speaker off that I had classical music for concentrating and coming up with this over the past few hours. But these are rooted in fundamental concepts from human biology to human psychology, from athletes to pianists, and everything in between. I've thought, and this applies to everything from skiing, from learning how to ski or race on a track, to knitting and sewing, to learning a language. So I'll not drag on. And I made a mnemonic for this so that it's more memorable. And the mnemonic is crepe, like a French crepe. Literally just CREPE. And those letters stand for catalyst. I'll explain them in just a second. Catalyst, reason, eustress, path, and energizing. So let me explain them now. So I could have said actually, and I should say that there are only 5 ingredients to the crepe that is learning, and these are the 5 ingredients. So the first letter is C, and it's catalyst. And I know that word sounds strange. It's maybe something you've heard in chemistry, but let me explain why I've chosen this word instead of a simpler word like cause or calling, which I could choose and you can use. But basically the reason is because learning at a fundamental level, and let's actually define what learning is before we even discover how to do it. It's important to address what something is, just like how if you want to learn to drive a car, and if you saw a car for the first time, you would first have to understand that, well, a car is for transporting, for getting yourself from point A to point B. Then once you understand what that thing is, this new technology, then you can learn how to use it. So learning at a fundamental level, I've come to realize, is just adaptation. Or in other words, minimizing error over iterations. And notice how I said over iterations here. I'm not talking about being perfect from the beginning, because learning, the whole point of learning is being bad at the beginning. So if you're terrible at something and you're here to learn how to learn, then perfect, you're in the right place. That's what it's all about. We're not going to be incredible at everything from the get-go. Some sun shining at me there. And so learning, yes, I've learned that learning is just adaptation. And there's actually a few different kinds of learning. There's biological learning, which we don't choose to learn this way. It's just, evolutionary learning. Species just learn to do certain things over time. There's subconscious learning, like a child who touches a hot stove. It might not tell itself, oh, let's not do that because that's hot. It will just understand subconsciously without even having to think that. It's not going to devise a plan not to do that. They're just going to understand from then on. Just like a dog, if or let's say some kind of small animal, if there's a predator somewhere, it will just learn that that's there. That's subconscious learning. That's the second layer. And the third level or layer is conscious learning. And that's what we're doing here. We're consciously learning things. And learning is just adaptation. So what we want to do is over tries. We want to reduce error. And so, in other words, the reason I'm telling you this is because adaptation is just change, right? It's positive change. And for change to occur, any kind of change, we need a catalyst. Once again, circling back to the first word of this, a catalyst is just a spark. It's the cause of change. It's the reason something has started to change, the spark, the ignition, right? And so the reason why this is so important is, and what catalyst means here in this mnemonic is just having a reason why, a motivation, drive. Or other words I've come up with is your why, your intent, the significance of this. And I'll let you know from experience right now that the most powerful and effective causes and intents or catalysts are those that come from within. Sparks that come from within. For example, curiosity is an incredible spark. This sounds just ridiculous. Most people think, I don't have time to study and learn about things that I'm curious about. There are more important things to learn about, like taxes and all the things we're told to talk about in school that I don't even care about, but I want to become a doctor, so I'm learning all these things, or astrophysicist, whatever, astrophysicist. I do not think that's a thing. Nonetheless, yes, from experience, I've come to learn that curiosity and passion and purpose, also feeling a mission, a sense of mission when it comes to some connection with something, those are far more powerful causes and reasons why to learn something than just pure curriculum. This is why you probably don't remember most of the things you learned in school, and it's also why people who just love something fervently, just avidly, they're so passionate about it. And I will say passion on its own is not enough. We want to stack curiosity and passion and purpose. But people who just love something and are obsessed with it learn and improve far faster than anyone else. And not just faster, but also more effectively. So that's the first one. And there's a lot of science, a lot of neurobiology that I could go into behind that, but that at its core is the reason for all those things. And I'll give you one quick analogy. It's like when it comes to a car, when it has a reason why, that's like it having an engine. But specifically when the reason is intrinsic, so like curiosity, for example, when you have an intrinsic reason why, that's like your car having an engine, which obviously it's supposed to do. But if you have an extrinsic reason, then that's like pushing your car off a cliff to gain speed. It will give you a lot of speed quick, but you'll eventually crash. So extrinsic causes or pursuits are things like, to get money or fame or recognition, whatever it be. The second thing for CREP, so C, catalyst. Second one is result. And this one is very, very simple, that will not need nearly as much explanation. If you want to learn something, learning is, it's you want to get somewhere, you want to learn something, right? So to get somewhere, you want to know where you're going. Because often learning can be like being stuck in the woods or in a forest where there are so many trees, but you're just so confused because there are so many concepts that you don't understand, right? That's what it's often like when you're learning. But when you give yourself a result, a goal, an objective, it kind of gives you direction in that forest. Okay, my goal is to get out of this forest, and specifically getting out is somewhere that way. You've given yourself a direction. So that's the second thing, the result, in other words, your goal or objective. Now, third is eustress. And by the way, bear with me here because all of these things, I'm kind of just speaking my mind because I've just, once again, consolidated all this. I've just pieced this all together. So I'm handing it over to you just as I've pieced it together. The third one is eustress. And I know that sounds weird because it sounds like I'm just saying stress. And why would you want to be stressed? How are you going to learn if you're stressed? But this is slightly different. This is eustress, spelled E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. So it's just stress with E-U at the beginning. And just like how euphoria is something that's positive, it's something that you feel like you've been lifted out of your body, it feels incredible. Well, stress is the positive version of stress. In other words, it's stress that makes you grow. Just like how you might feel good after, if you're a footballer, you might be nervous to step out there onto the pitch, or if you're a musician, you're a singer, you might feel nervous to step out onto the stage, but it's a positive form of stress because you're growing. You're learning the confidence to step out there, and as you step out there and you feel even more stress, once again, you're growing, you're learning to not be so stressed in the future, and you're growing your confidence. Or another good example is when you go to the muscle, wow. When you go to the gym and train your muscles, there we go. When you go to the gym and train your muscles, then training your muscles is eustress for your muscles. It's stress because they're under load, but it's positive stress because it's going to cause them to grow. And when it comes to learning, our brain is sort of like a muscle as well, in that when we learn things, we are essentially just connecting two things together. We are connecting what we already know to what we don't yet know. And that's what learning is just basically. And so each time we, for example, if we're learning French, and each time we try and remember a word, how to say a word, we're strengthening the connection there. And in doing so, we'll be able to come up with that faster next time. And I'll go back to the analogy because I forgot to mention this when I was mentioning cause or catalyst. When you have a reason why, it's like an electrician coming into your house and you telling them, well, this lamp here, this lamp is the lamp I use most and is the most important one to me. So I want to make it in a way that I want you to optimize the cables. So if I switch the light switch, it's going to be very quick. And you might have another lamp elsewhere, like my lamp here, that's not as important to you. And sometimes we're a bit laggy. It takes us long to remember something. Well, that's kind of like your lamp taking several seconds to turn on. Imagine how annoying that would be. Well, that's like telling your electrician to come in and rewire things so that the lamp that you actually want to turn on will turn on faster. In other words, you've given yourself a reason why, the most important lamp to you. So back to eustress. Eustress is about balance. It's the balance between challenge and simplicity. So those are two different things here. So let me explain them to you. And remember, it's about balance. So they're connected. They're not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, two different ends of the spectrum, but it's still important to address them individually. So challenge, if we don't have challenge, well, that's just boring. Why would we want to learn anything? There's no signal there. There's no reason to learn anything because we already know it. So there's no challenge. But if we're learning something new and it's challenging, we'll want to learn that. This part is quite obvious, but there are ways to increase challenge. For example, if you're learning French, it's just going to be difficult and challenging at the beginning by default because you don't yet know the language. But as you move on, you can add things like generation and retrieval and spacing and interleaving. And I don't want to confuse you here. That's something for another day, but those are ways to make your learning more challenging. But the point is, it's about having challenge in there, of course. And then the other side of the same coin is simplicity. Because if things are too challenging, then the system breaks. it's like having a rubber band, and if you pull the rubber band too far, it's just going to snap, right? If you're not pulling the band at all, then you're just not using the band for what it's made for. That's the same with our brain. We want it to be challenging, but not too challenging so things snap, not literally. But what that means when you're learning French, for example, is having someone translate and compare terms, French terms, to English terms for you so that you can connect them together. Or when it comes to learning skiing, something physical, and you're using motor neurons. When it comes to skiing or learning how to drive and racing on a track, for example, you want to take baby steps. You want to learn how to change the gears properly before going all out. Or you want to learn how to ski with a method called a wedge instead of parallel skiing, which is more professional from the get-go. You want baby steps. And going back to, actually, here's an example. Here's a perfect example. So I'm sharing with you, I'm teaching you this concept for learning effectively, right? And I've given you a mnemonic, which is CREP. Now, by doing that, I've made things simpler because I've not only helped you visualize this, you subconsciously, without even realizing it, most likely visualized the CREP. And what that did is that connected, it created it's association. In other words, I've got it there. Association is kind of like Velcro, where on one side Velcro has tiny little hoops, and on the other, tiny little hooks. And these connect together. I'm not gonna let go of my phone unless I do this. You have your hooks and your hoops. They're kind of there's loads of them obviously, and they're kind of connecting like this. And that's what association is. When we have something we do not yet know and something that we do know and do understand, when we connect those together, that's how learning occurs. And that's why association is powerful, because you use something that you understand, like you understand what a CREP is, you can visualize it. And by the way, I used a word such as CREP because when we visualize things, we remember them better. We evolved to remember images and locations. A location is just an image in physical form. For example, you probably remember your childhood room, the room that you grew up in, better than you remember your mum's phone number from that time. Or even better than you remember your mum's phone number now. Even though the phone number is more important, probably, you still remember the image better, right? So I'm telling you that because that's one way we can simplify things for ourselves. We can create analogies. We can create examples where we understand something complex using more simple examples. So to summarize that one, that's the balance between challenge and simplicity, which is eustress. Some people call this the Goldilocks zone. Then number four is the P, and it's path. And more specifically, it's structured, focused engagement with feedback over time. So basically, going back to the whole analogy from the beginning, to summarize it, the C, the catalyst, well, that's the reason why you depart and start walking along the path in the first place. 2, the result, well, that's where's this path leading? Where do you actually want to go? Why that, where does this path lead? And then eustress, well, that's the right amount of the balance and the right amount of challenge compared to simplicity once again. So if it were too rocky, the path, then it's going to be too hard from you from the get-go, right? Whereas if it's flat, then once again, it's just boring. You're not going to learn very much, are you? You already know how to walk along a flat surface. So now when it comes to the fourth thing, the path, this is about making walking along the path as effective as possible. And one of these things is having milestones. If we go back to the forest analogy that I mentioned earlier, So you have your direction, you want to get out of the forest, but having milestones is like having little flags set up next to those trees. So you can actually navigate and feel a sense of progress. And that's crucial. We learn best when we feel a sense of progress. We can see our progress. It's visible. And another crucial thing for helping you progress along the path is feedback. Feedback can be just from yourself. You can reflect on what you've done, or even better, you can have a coach or a mentor, and they can give you feedback so you can walk along the path better. Another thing is attention or focus and concentration. If you're distracted while you're learning, then you're going to end up stumbling and falling along your path, or just veering off the path completely and walking down the wrong path, or you're just not going to learn how to walk very well at all in general. So that's number 4. It's about, oh yeah, and there's another thing, it's consistency and exposure. Or, yeah, we'll call it consistency. You want to show up to the path, and actually, so you actually walk the path, right? If you don't show up very often, you're not going to make very much progress. So that all of that is just about walking the path as best as you can, essentially. And then the last thing is energizing. And this is crucial because a lot of us think, and I used to think this in a way, we think that if we just do, then that's the most important thing, and it's how we grow. But that's not the case. Just like how a tree needs both sunlight and water, we need both exercise and doing and learning and recovery and rest. So the thing is that proper growth inside our brains, because learning is in a way growth, it's the strengthening of connections between neurons. The thing is that growth happens mostly not during learning, but afterward. And that's crucial. So basically, just like how in the gym, you train your muscles, and by training your muscles, you break down the little muscle fibers. Well, the actual growth of the muscles happens later on when you eat protein and when you sleep, not during exercise. The exercise just makes space and room for that growth to occur. So that's what learning is like as well. So you want essentially good sleep, of course. You want active rest, like going on a walk as well. And people think that watching TV is rest. It's not very effective rest. Whereas going on a walk, which seems counterintuitive because going on a walk is more active, but when you're on that walk, if you're learning French, you can reflect and kind of try to remember and summarize what you've just learned. Or even if it's something active and physical like skiing, you can sit down, and obviously you might not do this on a walk. You might sit down and visualize in your room yourself skiing down a slope or driving, and by visualizing, actually, it improves the doing once we do it after, just having visualized something, which is incredible. And then another aspect to energizing yourself is eating well. If you do not have good energy, if you constantly feel slumped because you're nutrient deprived, you've not eaten at all, or you've eaten loads of junk food and you just don't eat well, you're not going to feel very energized. So this one is already 24-ish minutes long, so I'll leave it there. I hope this helps someone out there. If so, I would be very, very happy. And happy learning with your crap. All the best to you. Be mega. Ciao.